Let us bring in Ron Hosko. He is a CBS News security analyst and former assistant director of the FBI. He joins us now from our Washington bureau. Ron, let's begin with those remarks from Jeff Sessions earlier today. What stood out to you about his reaction to what unfolded in Charlottesville over the weekend?
Well, I think the Attorney General's comments were appropriate. Clearly, he was, as were others, defending and trying to support the president and perhaps what the president did not say in the immediate wake of these attacks. But I think the Attorney General, by and large, is a serious man. He is dedicated to the rule of law. He does get, weekly briefings from the FBI on all terrorism matters and significant criminal matters. And I think he will devote the appropriate resources. I personally know people in the FBI Richmond office. I know they are working around the clock on this case, not just to prove what is evident from the videotape of an angry man driving into a crowd, but to try to understand what motivated him and perhaps who else was aiding and abetting or conspiring with him to do this sort of harm.
Ron, what did you make of the president's statement? And do you think that the fact that he did not specifically criticize the white supremacists, the KKK, and other neo-Nazi groups makes it more difficult for officers on the ground?
You know, Vlad, I think the truest evidence that the president's statement was not clear enough and was not strong enough was the embrace of voices from the extreme right, from some of these extremist groups, claiming that it was a good statement and it did not discredit them, or David Duke's comments where he lashes himself to the president. And to me, the president must divorce himself from these groups in a very, very clear manner. This does make the law enforcement job more difficult because I think it emboldens these groups to go forward with their own sick agenda, and the president must make a clearer statement and reject this absolutely. As I saw the president's statement the other night, I think he does tend to speak off script. So he appears to be reading from prepared text, and then he drifts off and he makes one of these offhanded comments that did create this sense of a moral equivalence among the battling groups in Charlottesville. There's no doubt there were other counter-protesters who came armed for combat and wanted to engage in combat. But this is a different situation. These extremist groups need to be condemned in very clear terms. There should be no moral equivalence sense at the end of that speech. And I hope to hear the president do that himself, hopefully today.
Ron, the police have been heavily criticized, too. In fact, one of the organizers of this whole event said, part of the problem was the police didn't intervene the way they should. And I got to say, when I was watching a lot of the video, I was wondering that. When I saw these widespread brawls, I thought, isn't anyone there to stop it? But
Right.
You're an expert in this area. What do you make of the police response?
Well, first, the starting point has to come from what do the police know, their intelligence. What's their ability to understand and to estimate the size of these groups that are coming to protest, not just the protest group itself, but the counter-protesters? How will they come? What is their intention? And their intelligence really has to penetrate to try to get to intention and certainly to crowd size and capability. Here you're talking about the Charlottesville Police Department. If you look at their 2016 annual report, I think they have 120-some sworn officers. They had Virginia State Police. They certainly had the county. But it could be that they were, understaffed to do the job, first. And secondly, because perhaps they were understaffed, they didn't have the situational awareness to get to where the key conflicts were in a timely manner. So you did see repeatedly these street skirmishes breaking out, and quite clearly, you didn't see side streets blocked off in a way that would have prevented this deadly car attack.
Ron, the suspected, I want to ask you about the fact that there's been a spike recently in these hate groups that have been coming out in hate crimes. You're a former FBI agent. Back in 1964, the United States government and the FBI decided to make a concerted effort in the wake of those brutal murders of Cheney, Schwerner, and Goodman in Mississippi to go after these hate groups, to go after the KKK. But lately we started to see a spike. What are the resources devoted to infiltrating these groups, ferreting them out, seeing what they're up to? Because for a lot of people who hear often from the President of the United States about Islamic terrorism, we don't often hear, in fact, we never hear about domestic terrorism, specifically as it relates to these white supremacist groups.
Right. There are domestic terrorism agents assigned in every field office. There is a domestic terrorism component at FBI headquarters who has the responsibility to oversee and manage those local resources and to understand the threat. But, you know, Vlad, it's a great question, and the reality is post 9/11, and in many ways the Bureau is reactive to the threat, not in front of it too often. They are proactive in response to, but too often reactive. So we saw the muscling up of the FBI's counterterrorism division post 9/11, where hundreds more agents poured from the criminal programs into counterterrorism work. And the focus was very much on international terrorism. And I think the focus on domestic terrorism has essentially remained the same, probably for the last 15 years. While the criminal resources have declined in that same period as we focused on this international terrorism threat. And still we see these one-off attacks, and they tend not to be a Tim McVeigh-style mass casualty event as much as a one or two, and they just don't grab the public's attention, they don't grab DOJ's attention, they don't necessarily grab the FBI's attention. Perhaps this is the sort of attack that it will take to galvanize that and to shift some resources.
Well, I certainly hope so. Ron Hosko in Washington, thank you so much, Ron.
Sure thing.